Maybe don't know.
This time, this time, this time, this time, this time to build. 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 This time power. This time to build power. This time to build power. This time to build power.
What's up, everybody? I'm your host, Chris Hampton. Welcome to episode 81 of the Power Company Podcast, brought to you, as always, by PowerCompanyClimbing.com. It is sunny and perfect here in Lander today. My A2 injury is close to, 90-ish%. We leave for Joe's Valley on Friday, and I can feel that springtime stoke welling up. And to be honest, I haven't been this excited for a climbing season since shortly after I had shoulder surgery a few years ago. So I had worked really hard for a long time to reach some big goals. And after reaching those goals, I hurt myself. And that sort of started the wheels turning that built this thing. So my main focus and excitement for the last couple of years have really been in this business. Coaching, training people, this podcast, fostering the growth of this pretty amazing community that I've been surrounded by. And with that, I'd like to say thanks to all the people who come out to fill up our workshops, who buy shirts, journals, anything else, the coaches that we share ideas with, the folks who have gone through the pain in the ass process to leave ratings and reviews on iTunes, and especially hugely to the patrons of this podcast. At first, this was just something of an advertising vehicle for our training plans. That's sort of what it became kind of quickly. And while it has to remain that to some degree, it also became my continued education. I learned so much talking to my guests and then engaging in conversation with the listeners afterward. And I couldn't do that without the patron support that I have. It's grown to the point that I feel like I'm on a mission here, like not to push my own bias, but to explore all of the ideas and to help weed out where your focus needs to be. To introduce you to new ideas, to remind you of old ideas that are just as valid as they've ever been. I feel like that's my mission here. And doing these interviews in person takes a massive amount of time, effort, energy, not to mention money. And I can't do that at the level that I am or the level that I want to without patron support. So thanks. Huge thanks. If you're interested in learning more, patreon.com/powercompanypodcast. I am so incredibly grateful for the community and conversation that has sprung from all of this. And speaking of community, today's guest is one of my absolute favorite people to bump into at the crag or at the boulders. Many of you may know his name from his photography, but Edwin Teran is also a strong and perhaps more important, thoughtful climber. We've had several conversations over the years that I look back on and wish we'd recorded, and finally we did. And I actually recorded this conversation about 18 months ago in Red River Gorge, and I've listened to it several times since, but just sort of realized that you haven't gotten to hear it yet. And the idea for this conversation was sort of twofold. Edwin gets a mention in episode 9 with John Cardwell, which is still one of my favorite episodes, by the way. He was John's partner in that final trip to Biography, John's big long-term battle. And knowing Edwin and knowing how much thought he puts into his climbing, I knew he had some great realizations from that trip. See what I did there?
Maybe don't know.
This time.
Getting the chance to climb with somebody that's stronger than you just changes your perception of what's hard drastically.
This time.
first of all, congrats on the rig today.
Thank you.
And all the sending. Like you've been crushing this trip.
It's been a good trip.
Yeah, and we were just talking the other day, and something you said. I went back to my car and I'm driving, and I'm like, shit, we should have dug into that more. And I'm like, no, I'm glad I didn't dig into that more, because now I can just pull Edwin onto the podcast and we can talk about this. But you were talking about swing line a season or two ago or something, and you were working on it with someone who you felt was just a notch above you in their climbing, and how important that was. So talk to me about that season on swing line again.
Yeah, so that was last fall, so about a year ago. And I wound up meeting this kid here in the Red, Matty Zane. Awesome guy, and wound up having projects at the Dark Side and at the Motherlode. And at the time, he was working on swing line and he was working on Transworld. Yep. And I was trying Darth Maul and Omaha. Cool. And it felt like, just watching him climb, watching the stuff that he was doing that trip, he was, I felt like he was a step ahead in his climbing from where I was at. And, the season came and went. He wound up putting a lot of work into both of those routes and walking away without finishing him.
As happens often in this sport. Yeah.
To all of us, right? Yeah. So a year goes by and I'm driving out to Kentucky from Colorado, trying to think about what I'm going to try this trip. And those two routes were high up on the list.
Yeah. You had kind of you had ticked up to there. Like those were the next logical progressions, right?
It was time.
Yeah.
And it was hard to kind of feel like I was ready for it, because
Sure.
I just had in my mind this climber that was a lot better than me, that had tried and that had walked away empty-handed. So I think It took somewhere on that drive into like hour 15 or something, it just took making peace with that idea of like, I'm just going to show up and I'm going to enjoy working on him, and it's going to be totally fine if I walk away without doing him. I'm bound to learn something.
Yeah, no doubt. And I don't think that's an easy thing to do. I mean, and that's kind of what we're going to dig in here with. It's really easy to be the strongest guy in your group all the time, or just always take the back seat, but it's tough to figure out when you need to step it up and pass the people that you thought were stronger than you, or meet them where they are. And you're in an interesting situation in that you're a photographer. You get to shoot lots of badass climbers, and then in turn you end up climbing with lots of badass climbers. And that's a pretty cool place to be if you're willing to keep your mind open, right? You can definitely shut down in that situation.
Yeah, I think it all depends on your approach, and photography's been this amazing way to connect with other climbers. It's always been kind of like the starting point or the introduction for a lot of these friendships that have developed over time. So like a good example that comes to mind is doing a project with a couple other photographers and John Cardwell in the VRG last spring.
Yeah, I was going to bring John up because we've had him on the podcast.
You've had him on the podcast.
And we talked about you in that episode.
Yeah. So it was basically went out on that trip purely as a photographer. And it turned out John needed a belayer. And so I wound up not shooting that much. I was actually like belaying him while other photographers were shooting him. And he encouraged me to climb. He was like, oh, you should warm up too, and you should try this. And I had the chance to climb with somebody that I've always looked up to as a climber. I really like John's style, and I've been living in the same town for a while. So it was this really cool chance to climb with somebody like him, which turned into this amazing invitation to go to Sayus with him 3 months after that. And kind of be there for his process on biography. And it opened up like such a cool cool experience. It was photography that was the first kind of connection.
Right.
And then, yeah, because I'm a climber also, then it turns into like the relationship evolves from just climber photographer to like, oh, we can be climbing partners too.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I've seen you season to season here in the Red, and I feel like I've seen, after watching you today climb on Transworld and crush the shit out of Transworld, I feel like I've watched you improve pretty dramatically from the last time I watched you climb to now. Like, it just looked like a totally different climber. And not that you were a bad climber before. It just looked like it looked like you overwhelmed Transworld. Like it was no match is what it looked like. And I think that has to come partially from, taking this trip with John over there and being able to climb with these stronger climbers, because you and I have these conversations, and I know you put a lot of thought into paying attention to what they're doing, right?
Yeah. I think there's definitely an element of putting a lot of work into my own climbing in terms of recognizing areas that I needed to improve on, like recognizing weaknesses that I had and really working on that. Mm-hmm. But getting the chance to climb with somebody that's stronger than you just changes your perception of what's hard drastically. If you're climbing just with people at your own ability and we're all having a hard time on this route, it just builds up this aura of like, this route's really hard.
Yeah.
And it can be so refreshing to watch somebody just hike it.
Yep.
It totally shatters this like notion of it being so hard or, like this big deal thing. You're like, that guy just hiked it.
Yep.
And it doesn't mean it's going to be that easy for me, but it also means that it's not impossible.
Right. It's humanly possible. So
it's humanly possible, but it comes with, I think it's healthy as long as you keep perspective and you keep your ego in check, because it can be really challenging to partner up with somebody that's crushing route after route.
Yeah, totally.
And you're just belaying them on all these sends, and then you're stuck on your project for like weeks.
Right.
It's easy to feel down about yourself or to compare yourself to somebody else. So it takes having perspective, like
exactly.
You're on your own journey and climbing and they're on theirs, and nothing that they do has any like effect on what you're doing at the time. We're both on our own trips, and if anything, it's just cool to feel like somebody's building momentum and really psyched, and that can be contagious. So I think it really depends on how you relate to climbing with somebody that's succeeding.
Yeah, I definitely agree, because like you said, you have to keep perspective. You have to, for me, it helps to take the numbers out of the equation and just be like, what level is he challenging himself to? So if this person is sending everything they try first or second attempt, and I'm in project mode, then I know that they're not challenging themselves to that level. And that's okay. You don't always have to challenge yourself, to your absolute limits. Sometimes those first and second go challenges are what you need. Mm-hmm. But I could also step down and do first and second go challenges, if I want to. So I try to take the numbers out of it, because we're all so different. Yeah. And just look at the level of challenge. And something you said a minute ago about the ego, and how you also went back and worked on some of your weaknesses, and some of those things are what are changing you as a climber as well. I think that once you understand how to control your ego, and it helps to be around better climbers and take a good attitude into that, then it's easier to look at your weaknesses and be okay with saying, okay, I suck at this. I need to go back and work on this. Were there, did you have conversations with John or with any other climbers who you admired about their weaknesses? Have you ever heard them talk about those things?
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, I feel like every hike down from Sayus for the first 2 weeks with John, he was doing like therapy with me, because I was getting my ass kicked. It's not an easy place to climb. Mm-hmm. The warm-ups are really hard. They're these like polished, kind of run out slab climbs. And it takes a while to get used to the style, and any hard route that I tried, I felt like was really intimidating. So on the walk down, it was often these therapy sessions where John was like, "It's okay, man. It happens to everybody. It's a really hard place. A lot of people don't even come back."
Yeah.
So having that sort of support was amazing, just like while I was there. But then,
and he had gone through his own battle.
yeah,
And was still in his battle.
I showed up late in the game.
Yeah.
He'd put so much time into that route and into his project. I kind of just showed up for like the sweet spot at the end. But yeah, I think spending time with other climbers, and in a way, for me, I feel like I come from, like my background is just like I started outdoor climbing.
Right.
And I started kind of late when I was 21.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, climbing was always about mentors, and finding somebody that could take me outside and show me the ropes. And, the whole time, like I was constantly seeking out partners that were more experienced so that I could learn from them.
Yeah.
And there's too many people to be able to name that have been a significant part in like me learning more about climbing. But in a way, the whole experience of being able to connect with these like high-end climbers through photography, it's almost like finding the ultimate mentor in a way. Mm-hmm. It felt a little bit like, it felt pretty surreal to take a trip to Sayus with John Cardwell and like belay him sending biography. Right. I think if you would have told me I would be doing that, like even just like 3-4 years ago, I'd be like, bullshit, that's not going to happen. So in a way, it was this opportunity to like not just watch somebody that's like, doing like this craft that we're into, that we're psyched on getting better, that's doing it to such a high level, but also get to like pick their brain about it, like, how did you train for this? Like, what are you working on? How are you dealing with like falling at the same spot over and over again? How are you still psyched? And and I learned so much from just those little conversations up to the cliff or on the way back down, and really special kind of opportunity to be able to go on a trip like that.
Yeah. I mean, as a weekend warrior, I haven't had a ton of opportunities to climb with the big names, but I do get the opportunities because I'm involved in the community to the extent that I am, and I really relish those opportunities. That to really watch someone's approach to their whole day, and just like you were saying, pick up on those little things. And what are some of the things that you picked up from John on that trip? Like, was there something in his approach to the route or his approach to rest days or anything, any little things that you saw?
I think that from John, it was mostly about like perseverance. How can you, like, what does it take to really like stick it out and finish something that you started? Yeah. And I think that the way that he went about it the summer that I went with him was totally different than the previous summer. And that was a cool thing to watch because it helped kind of inform me in terms of what I was going to do this season. So the year before I went, he had just gone there and he would hike up to the cliff. He would warm up. He would try biography once. He would rest for a long time, warm up again, and then try biography again. And that was pretty much every day unless it was a rest day. Mm-hmm. And when we were there, he kind of had a different approach. He was climbing a lot of different things, and I think part of it was he loved Sayus so much, and he was so psyched to show me around. And this route is amazing. Like I'll just hang draws, and you should try it. Because there was rain, we wound up going to another spot called San Leger, which is a little bit more of an overhanging kind of tufa sport climbing area, and he was really psyched on on-sighting routes, and that was some of the coolest things to watch. He on-sighted really hard routes and mixed it up a lot. So we were, trying one route, then he'd go to biography for maybe a couple of days and then take a break and go somewhere else. And and it felt like it kept things really fresh, and it didn't have a sort of like a feel of like just grinding. You know, it wasn't like show up every day, try the project, go back down. It was really fun. You know, we were doing a lot of different things.
Yeah, and he talked about that some in our conversation, and it just occurred to me, and I hadn't really thought of this before, but you know, when I've been in that situation where I've spent time being the low man on the totem pole, and then I get to go back out with these new abilities and, you know, feeling like I'm a better climber. And then all of a sudden I'm the guy showing people around, and I'm the guy hanging draws and that kind of stuff. It's empowering in a way. And I wonder if you being there and him getting to share this love of Seus and show you around and hang draws and watch you enjoy it, I wonder if that's not a big part of his success as well, because I think that really is, you know, going from being the low man on the totem pole and climbing with better climbers, where he was coming after Chris Sharma and Dave Graham and, you know, these guys that he had looked up to for so long, and then getting to be the guy, you know, I think that's huge.
Yeah, I agree. And he was just so psyched on being in France and just such a good tour guide. You know, he was psyched on like all the routes that he'd done. He was like, you have to try this. And if you try this route, then you're set up really well to try this route. And on rest days, we got to go eat, you know, the tortons in town, and you got to go do this. And there was this definite stoke that was coming from just kind of taking the lead in that sense and like showing a newbie around. Like I didn't know anything about it. I'd never been to France before. So that was really, I think that was a big element in kind of keeping it light and keeping it fresh. And then towards the end of that trip, I had kind of a funny experience where like my first 2 weeks, like I needed like therapy on the walk down from the cliff because I was struggling, you know, wasn't doing very good. And after that, things started picking up, and you start getting into a good groove and understanding how to move on that rock, and things really kind of came together, and I started having a really good time. And when John finished biography, he was pretty ready to go back home.
Sure.
And I wasn't. I was like, you know, I went from like wanting to go home on week 1 to like, oh, I want to stay here a little bit longer. Yeah. And funny thing wound up happening where somebody who you work with, Colette, wound up getting in touch with John, trying to look for a partner for Seus. And I was like, well, I need a partner, you know, like tell Colette we'll link up, you know, let's climb together. So after John left, I wound up climbing with her. And I feel like I learned a lot from climbing with Colette for the last leg of that trip. And I think that what I kind of what I saw her do that trip really helped me this season, big time.
How so?
So when Colette got there, she didn't have too much time, and she had a goal to do an 8B route, a 13D. I forget what it was called, but a pretty bouldery, pretty tough route at the Demi-Lune wall.
Yep, I remember this.
So she just got there and she went to work. And she was such a good sport because I had a project on the Berlin Wall, so we were walking like a good 2 miles on the top of the cliff every day after the hike back and forth. But she got on the route on her first day, and she really couldn't do the bottom boulder problem on it. Like, she really couldn't do it. Yep. She didn't sweat it. She kind of pulled through it and went to work on the rest of the route, pieced some stuff together. There was another really hard boulder on the top, and she worked it out. She had a few different options. And I remember being on the ground belaying, thinking to myself, like, Colette's a great climber, but but there's no way she's going to do this route.
Right.
Especially with the time that she has. And I think it's part of the baggage that we have as Red River Gorge climbers.
Yeah.
Like, if you don't do all the moves on a route your first go in the red, like, you're not looking too good, right?
Yeah.
It's like straight up endurance. So we're used to, like, you really should do all the moves. And I think it's something that I've had to work pretty hard to overcome when I go to other areas.
Oh yeah, same here.
It's really difficult.
Yep.
So, Colette came down and I was kind of expecting her to be like, all right, well, we're going to pick a different one, shop around a little bit. And she was psyched. She was like, yeah, it was good. Good first date. I was like, cool. She's psyched. So went back home, next day showed up and, I don't remember the exact days, but second day she still, like, she tried that lower boulder problem and tried figuring some stuff out, but it still didn't go.
Right.
And she chipped away at the top, and then, it kept going that way until the day before the end of her trip. Like, she almost sent the route. Like,
right.
If she would have had like another day on the trip, I'm convinced she would have done it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd never really seen somebody do that.
Stick through when they haven't even done all the moves yet.
My approach was like, if I try a route and I can't do all the moves on my first day, I'm going to walk away and I'm going to pick a different route.
Yeah.
And I remember talking to her while we were there and just, seeing not only how she was working through it, but how it didn't really affect her psyche. And her, she would come down from the route and like, the lower boulder problem still hadn't gone. And she was psyched. Like, it was a good day.
Yep.
She did bigger lengths at the top, like always positive, like happy at the end of the day. And fast forward a few months and I show up here in Kentucky and I start trying Transworld and I can't do the lower crux.
Right.
And
yeah, it was just a few days ago you were telling me you can't do that move.
I couldn't do the move.
Yeah.
And I'm trying it with friends that I've climbed with for a while, like my peers, so guys that we've worked on routes together before, like we're kind of about the same, same level in our climbing. Everybody's hiking that lower part and they're falling at the top.
Yep.
And I show up day one and I can't do the move, and show up day two, still can't do the move. I couldn't do the move for the first 5 days on the route. And there's no way I would have actually stuck it out had I not had that experience of belaying Colette on her project in Sayus. There's no way I would have, I think I would have written it off at day one, maybe day two.
Yep. And knowing Colette's background and her history, she learned that from climbing with better climbers, and going from that apprentice to the teacher, like you put it today when we were talking at the crag. That's kind of what happens. That's when you are able, when you feel like you've started to master something, when you're able to become the teacher, and I think that's what happens there. And people are going to see you do that on Transworld and make that same connection in their climbing, and eventually, make that connection for someone else. So, yeah,
it's really valuable to see kind of what it takes some people to finish a route. For the most part, we hear about the send and how easy it felt at the end, and how much work somebody put into it, but
totally,
we don't really get to see the work, and it's not pretty.
The process can be a grind. I climb a fair amount with a good friend of mine, BJ Tilden, in Wild Iris in Wyoming, and watching him this summer chip away at this 14D thing he was working on was incredible to watch the level of detail that he paid attention to. Every day he knew the humidity, he knew the temperature. He would get there and he'd be looking for the wind, and down to these little micro details. those are things I take for granted a lot of times because, at the Red, it's just always humid. So
Yeah.
we just assume it's going to be humid. If there's a dry day, like everybody's cheering and everybody sends, you know, like this weekend or the past few days. Yeah. Everybody's sent.
Everybody's sent.
But watching that level of attention to detail, I think is huge because if I feel like after watching that, if I can do 14A while not paying attention to the details and not watching my diet all that much, then if I were to dial in like BJ does when he's working on a project, then maybe I could climb even harder, so
I think we all could.
Exactly.
Like we all could if we put the same amount of work that some of these top level climbers are putting in, then I think our red point limits would go up.
Yeah, and we can't all do that. We don't all have that kind of time or energy to put into climbing. A lot of us have other lives and other things going on, but I think there are key things we can take away. And I think what you just illustrated is one of those things that you can, just because you can't do all the moves first try doesn't mean you should just give up on it. As long as you're inspired by it.
Yeah.
As long as you're super psyched. How about this? How about let's take a quick break and let's think of a few things actionable things that we've learned from stronger climbers that we can pass down.
Yeah. And you know what? One thing I thought about when you were just talking about details, the funny switch that kind of happened this season, showing up to climb with my usual friends and my usual partners, the people that I've been climbing with for years here, is that when you're climbing with somebody that's so much stronger than you and they're getting on a route that you're working on, like a project that's hard for you, they're not going to be very helpful in terms of like beta
for sure
and movement and stuff like that. Usually you'll just hear, you grab that hold and you pull down and you go to the next one, right?
Yeah.
And the cool thing about climbing with people that are your peers on a similar project is that's when you can really start talking about the details. It's like you can grab that hold with like the thumb on the little triangle,
into little micro beta,
and twist your foot in this. You're not going to get that from a 515 climber that's trying your project because they're just it's gonna feel pretty easy for them.
And that's at all levels. I get it from BJ. Like he's like, oh, just do it like this. Like this hold's good. Do it this way. And I'm like, that hold fucking sucks. I can't possibly do it that way.
Yeah, I need help.
Or he'll be in the middle of the crux of the thing I'm trying, and he's like, well, you can do it like this, or you can do it like this, or like this, or like this. And I'm like, no, I can't.
Yeah.
I need to find the way that works. Or when I'm climbing with Annalisa, I'm like, just grab that jug. And she's like, it's a jug in your world, not in mine.
In my world.
So, that's for all levels.
It's all relative.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think it if anything, the going back and forth seems like the healthiest approach. Really trying to team up with partners that are stronger than you, I think has its benefits and can really help kind of show you what's ahead, how things can feel. It can inform you a lot about rhythm. So a big thing that I hear here in the States in general or in the Red, somebody falls and you hear like, I just like, where's my power? I need to go bouldering. Like I don't have power, or I need to go hangboarding. Like my fingers are so weak. I hear that all the time. I need to get power or go hangboarding. Right. And, and it was really different in France a lot of times, just the way that climbers would talk about stuff, like, how's the route going? Like, I'm not not finding a good rhythm on the route. Like I haven't found the pace or the rhythm, or it went beyond physical strength or
Right.
how strong your fingers were.
Right.
And to me, that's really important, because I think that climbing, can be measured by finger strength, but there's also so much more to it.
So much more.
And I think that finding a good rhythm for your movement on a certain route, and a pace between rests, and that's kind of when you tap into that more flowy kind of choreographed aspect of projecting that can feel really fun when you find that flow. It feels amazing.
Totally.
And I think that's really helpful. You watch a really good climber move, and there's a certain flow and rhythm to their step, and everything is really deliberate. And I think that when you get on harder routes, it has to be that way. Like you might have one spot where you can chalk up your right hand, like that's it.
Right.
And I think watching that and then kind of trying to apply that to what you're working on, and being deliberate about your movements, and trying to find that good rhythm that works for you is really important. It's
huge,
more important than hangboarding after you fall off of
I agree
a
completely.
certain section. So I think that for me was eye opening. To hear people talk about climbing in this new way that I hadn't heard before.
Yeah, that's really cool. Nate is big on that sort of conversation, and I've definitely converted into that. And I've always climbed that way. I never put it into words. And this season I've really been focused on like finding that rhythm and that flow in the style of routes that are the hardest for me. I can do that stuff on endurance climbs like the Red is famous for. It's the stuff like, Golden Touch and Falls City and these short little bouldery things with heinous holds that my rhythm gets blocked. I hit these sections where I get nervous or whatever it is, just throws off my normal flow.
Or you just tempted to camp out somewhere and just try to shake forever.
Exactly.
And you're like, no, dude, it's not going to work here.
It doesn't work. So that's what I've focused my whole season on to this point. Instead of climbing hard numbers, I'm climbing things that feel hard for me, but are at lower numbers. And I feel like it's been really good. And I'm after a few sins of those things and making them feel like, oh, I just crushed that. Like that felt amazing,
Yeah.
It's not my style at all. I normally look like total shit on it, but something clicked there. Whenever I get to the top of a few of those, like I have at this point, I'm starting to feel like I could get on harder climbs and do really well.
Yeah.
And that's a pretty cool feeling. And it's not because I've been hangboarding. It's not because I've been deadlifting. It's because I've focused a ton on that sort of flow and that sort of rhythm to my climbing in an area where I was really deficient.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I think that's super, super important.
It's really helpful. And I was mentioning the other day, sometimes the best seasons that I've ever had, the best seasons that I've ever had have maybe looked the worst on paper.
Yeah.
So I think, by far the most significant jump that I took in my climbing happened before last fall. So like before last year.
Yep.
When I just decided to stop sport climbing and go bouldering for the full summer.
Yep.
And I didn't send anything. I tried so many boulders in Colorado,
Yep.
and it on paper it looks like I didn't even rock climb.
Right.
Like it looks like I took the summer off.
Yeah, your 8A fucking dipped all the way to the bottom. That
exactly.
season.
You're like, dude, you're not doing anything.
Where's Edwin? Did he quit?
But it was the best. I learned and that was exactly what I needed at that point. I needed to address like weaknesses in terms of power and finger strength. And I had a blast. I just total beginner's mentality, embracing this discipline that I didn't have much experience on, and getting my ass kicked, but loving it and seeing this progress. When you're starting early on something, progress comes quick. It's when you've been doing something for years that it's so hard to make even like the smallest gains.
Yep. And you have to keep doing that.
Yeah.
You have to keep going back and revisiting those weaknesses, and that's tough to do, frankly, if you're always the leader of the pack and you're the guy that everyone looks to hang their draws or to, give them the beta or whatever. To go out there and address your weaknesses and fail for a whole season, that's tough to do unless you can drop that ego. So.
Yeah. And a lot of times, the only measurable aspect that we have in climbing is grades.
Right.
As arbitrary as they are, it's kind of the only standard that we have. And I think sometimes we lean too heavily on that to feel a sense of progression or satisfaction. And I think that I try to think about it as like, climbing is more than that. It's this craft that I've really enjoyed practicing. And I've really enjoyed trying to get better at it.
Yeah.
And
that's a great word for it, by the way. It's a craft.
It is a craft.
I appreciate that you call it that.
Yeah. And it's something that, I put so much energy into. I designed most of like my life around it because I love it.
Even your current celibacy.
My current celibacy, the Red River Gorge. It's a lot of sacrifices that are made. But it's if you think about it as a craft, it stops being so grade based, and it starts being more about this thing that you have a love affair with, that you're just trying to get better at because you really enjoy it.
Yeah. And the fact that it's less measurable scares a lot of people, frankly. Mm-hmm. I deal with clients all the time who are asking for units of measurement, like how are you measuring my progress? How have I progressed? And that's tough to say because I feel about it the same way you do.
Yeah, and sometimes it's more about. It's a hard thing to get to, and it took me years to even like think about it that way, and more years to act on it, even after I felt like I knew about it intuitively. But when you're thinking about it as a craft, you're just excited to get better at it, and a lot of times getting better at it means doing the parts of it that you're bad at. If you were working with sculpture, if you were working with some other type of craft of knitting, and you encounter something that like
there's a flaw in your work. Did you just go to knitting because I'm old? I'm just curious here.
Well, it can be anything. It doesn't even have to be physical, right? But if you're producing something that's tangible and you see a flaw in your work, your immediate reaction is like, I'm going to go back and I'm going to work on that. Clearly, like my corners suck, or like like my edges, or you're like, I need to get better at that. And it's so easy in climbing. You're like, oh, I suck at slab climbing, but I'm really good at like steep endurance climbing. I'm just going to
not even going to look at slabs ever again.
Yeah, I hate slabs. I'm not going to climb slabs. I'm going to go like pluck the low-hanging fruit in all the caves that we have around here.
Totally.
But that limits you, and it only why choose to focus on only one aspect of this craft when it's so varied and different. You can climbing is amazing how many different disciplines and styles we have available to play around with.
And one of the most fun things for me in my climbing that I've ever experienced was when I was a traddy starting out. I quit climbing for a while because I thought sport climbing was incredibly stupid and I didn't want to sport climb. And then I remembered I lived in the red and I should probably start trying to sport climb. So when I came back to climbing, I sucked and I had no endurance whatsoever. So endurance was my weakness. Like at the time, I could off the couch boulder, V6-ish, having not climbed in years because I just understood it. but I had no endurance. You know, the 40-foot gym routes were destroying me, the 10s,
Yeah.
you know. So I worked my ass off at endurance climbing, and it became my bread and butter. You know, it became my strength. And now I'm trying to flip that again. I'm trying to go back to, now I understand endurance climbing. I want to go back to learning to understand a higher level of hard moves. You know, and that was super fun for me to take that weakness and turn it into my strength, you know, what people recognized me as. And now I'm trying to do that again. So
Yeah, it's really satisfying.
yeah.
Because after a while, you really recognize that you're just kind of plucking low-hanging fruit.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
the satisfaction just diminishes with
Yep.
every route that you do in that style. You can even predict the number of attempts it's going to take you to do something in
Yeah.
your style, and
Yep.
it loses its magic. You know, there's something really cool about the uncertainty of whether or not you're going to do something, or whether it's
Yeah.
even possible for you. And venturing out into new styles is one of the best ways to, cure any plateau, I think.
Yeah.
You know, like break out of what you're used to and do something different. It'll do you good no matter what.
Yeah. When you were bouldering, were you climbing with strong boulders, or were you just going out there and throwing yourself at boulders?
You know, I came at it in an interesting way. So even though I'd lived in Colorado for a while, I hadn't really gone up and bouldered in the park, because I usually work in the summer. So go back to Colorado. I teach.
Beer down.
It's okay. I teach at this awesome place in Boulder. Been working there for like 6 years. This summer was the first time I didn't work there, but we do environmental education for kids.
Oh, really cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's really cool. So I did that right after I graduated college in Colorado. Did an internship with them during my last semester, and then just found that this was ideal seasonal work.
Yeah.
It was great to make money in the summer and take a trip. That's why I started coming out here in the fall. It just lined up perfectly.
Gotcha.
And I really loved the work, but it didn't give me that much time to go rock climbing. So it wasn't until last year that I changed my schedule a little bit and managed to go out, and wound up climbing with a friend of mine who had grown up in Boulder and climbed a lot around there. And he kind of had taken a long break from climbing and had just started getting back into it. So we both kind of were pretty new at bouldering and knew it going up into like these alpine areas, and just kind of psyched on.
And
on
the park's
checking it
kind
out.
of a bitch if you come from the red. Like
Yeah.
the climbing style is really hard there.
It's
if you're
really
used to
hard.
Big holds.
And it totally changed my approach. You know, I didn't like hiking before I started bouldering up there. I hated hiking. I hated approaches.
That's so funny because so many boulders are like, or so many people think boulders just don't do approaches. They don't carry anything.
Yeah. I mean, if you're
They're lazy.
If you're climbing in Colorado, you're
It's
definitely
not like
doing
that.
approaches. Yeah. And it was actually really funny. Like I knew I wanted to get into bouldering outside. I haven't really climbed much in a gym. I enjoy climbing outside, and I kind of felt like I started understanding what I needed to do to break through some of my plateaus and where I was stuck at the time. And it, through other people's suggestions, I was climbing a little bit with Nick Duddle at the time.
Yeah.
I remember he made a remark one day. We were climbing in the red. He said something like, "I can't believe like you've done whatever route with like the power that you have. It's like laughable, you know,
Right,
like your
right.
endurance carried you so far."
Yeah. I was in that same boat.
And it really stuck with me. And I'm like, well, if there's a way to get better, and you seem to be hinting at this, and you have more experience than I do, I'm gonna go try it. So started doing the hike to Upper Chaos, and chipping away at like the easy things, which there isn't too much. It just quickly started flailing.
Even the easy things are hard up there.
Even the easy things are hard. So you're climbing above 10,000 feet. The hike is really long. I remember at the beginning it was taking me about an hour and a half to go from the parking lot to the boulders and upper.
Yeah.
And then little by little just got really excited about being up in the mountains and being in the bad weather, and getting hit with the crazy storms was amazing. Just hiding under a cave and like feeling that power of the lightning and the wind. And it felt so raw and so different than a day at the crag sport climbing felt. And I needed it at the time. I needed something different and something new. And I mean, I just got hooked, and I started going up there like every other day, and started running up to Upper Chaos. So cut the hike down from like an hour and a half at the beginning to going from parking lot to the top in like 40 minutes. And without knowing it, building this really good kind of cardiovascular base. But it was just out of pure excitement. Like I just couldn't wait to get up to the boulder. So I was running, and I wasn't stashing pads. I was carrying my pad up there. I was carrying a water filter, so I didn't have to carry too much water and just filter my water up there. But it just became the grind that whole summer. It was like day up in the park, then rest day in town, and then next day up in the park. And I remember having a conversation with my buddy Kalen, who we were climbing up there together with before I was thinking of driving out here. And I was like, Kalen, I feel kind of silly about this trip to the Red this fall. I don't really think I should go. And he was like, why would you not go? And I was like, well, because we've been bouldering for the past 2.5 months. I haven't been on a rope in ages. Like, it's going to be a disaster of a season.
Yeah.
And he was like, no, man, you're being really silly. I think this is going to be a really good season for you. And I had goals that routes that I wanted to complete here. And I felt super intimidated by it. And I was like, I don't know, man. I don't think I'm going to go. Yeah. And it took quite a bit of pushing on his part to be like, dude, I think you really should go. Like, you might be surprised. And come to find out, like, it was the best thing for my sport climbing to take a break. Yep. And it totally shifted my ideas about how to prepare for this sort of trip. And, I went from my training for the Red, like in my early trips, was going to the spot and doing like 30-minute laps on the treadwall on jugs. And that's what I thought you should do, because I was going to climb endurance routes, so might as well just do endurance. And and then things totally flip-flop, and it was like, all right, like, power is what I need, because it's a weakness. I don't really, it doesn't come naturally to me, whereas endurance does. And so that summer was a pretty big deal for me.
That's cool.
And I sent nothing.
Yeah. And I think that's big. And I think it's interesting to note that, and I hadn't really thought of this way. I was kind of looking at it as, the differences between climbing with the much better climber and you being the low guy on the totem pole, switching to you being the strongest guy in the group. But I hadn't really looked at climbing with people who are right at your level, and I think that's big. And I haven't spent much time doing that, and maybe that's why I didn't go right there and think about that aspect of it as well. But I think that's really important, because you might not have gotten that same advice to go to the Red. He thinks it's going to be a good season for you from someone if you were the much stronger climber. Yeah. You may not have gotten that same advice. Yeah. And if you were, the supporting team for a much stronger climber, they might have said selfishly, yeah, you should just stay here because
I need someone to climb with.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, I think that's a really great point I hadn't really thought about.
And I think one of them.
So you need to mix it up.
You need to mix it up. Yeah. And one of the things that that I feel like is the maybe the one piece of advice that I find I'm giving the people that I'm climbing with now that are not used to projecting. I've been climbing a lot with some friends here that haven't really projected much before, and they're starting to get into it. And I feel like one of the big lessons that I learned from climbing with people that are a lot stronger is their strategy for projecting.
Yeah.
You know, there's so much to talk about in terms of strategy. And I think the biggest change for me was feeling like if I got on a route for my first time and it was going to be a hard route for me, I was pretty concerned with just getting to the anchors, especially if there was people around. If I felt like I was being watched, like I needed to summit.
Yeah.
And I really didn't work the moves very much because I was concerned about how I was being perceived by the other people at the crag.
Right.
And not as confident in my climbing. And then just seeing how some of these like really good climbers work on routes. You know, you go your first go and you dial in sections and you try a couple different ways, and then you repeat the crux a few different times.
Yep.
And you do so much work your first try that you're pretty ready to do it your second try. I think that, you know, in the past, it probably took me 4 or 5 goes just to figure out what I wanted to do on my red point attempt. And that's something that I feel like I'm constantly like telling the folks that I'm climbing with, you know, like go up there, work stuff out. Like don't worry about staying up on the wall for a while. Like make the best use of every go.
And really hard routes may not, you know, they may not be ready for red point attempts for days into the effort, you know, or longer, depending on how difficult it is. You know, they may. I've seen people not summit their project for the first several weeks they worked on it.
Yeah.
You know, because they're like, why do I need to go to the top? You know, I need to dial in all this hard stuff in the beginning first before I even worry about what's up there. Mm-hmm. You know, so, you know, it's a long process for a big project.
Yeah. And strategy can expedite that process a lot. Yeah. It can make the difference in weeks of how long it'll take you.
Years for me. Years.
Totally.
Yeah, that's really cool. So I tried to take a break earlier and you had some great ideas. So
I just kept talking.
Yeah, which is perfect. But I do want to kind of get a little list together of things, actionable things that people can learn from climbing with better climbers. So let's take a quick break. You can finish that beer you've been nursing.
Sounds good.
And we'll come up with a short little list.
Cool.
All right. And by quick break, I mean the rest of the day. We will be back tomorrow with a special board meeting with Edwin as guest host. And we'll be talking about the top 3 things you can learn from better climbers. In the meantime, I do want to say this. Don't let yourself become the big fish in a little pond, not without searching for bigger fish in other ponds. I've made that mistake, and you will stagnate every single time. Okay, I don't want to say too much here. I will say this. You can find Edwin's photography online at edwinteran.com. And you can and should follow him on Instagram at Edwin Teran. You can find us very, very soon at Climb So Ill the week of April 2nd. You can find us at Sport Rock in Virginia the week of April 10th. And you can support the podcast at patreon.com/Power Company Podcast. Or check out our training options at powercompanyclimbing.com. You can also follow us on all the social medias at Power Company Climbing. Not all. That's not true. No Snapchats. No Twitters. Because, like my dude Nolly Simon says,
we don't tweet, we scream like eagles.
This time. time, this time, this time to build, this time to build, this time to build, this time, this time to build, this time to build, this time to build, this time power, power, this time to build 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 power, this time to build, this time to build, this time